The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, this is Jennifer Schaus coming to you live from Washington, D.C., and today we are joined with David Dempsey as we kick off our 2017 Government Contractors webinar series. Thanks everybody for joining us today. Today's topic is federal cybersecurity requirements and contractor eligibility. David Dempsey will go through his slides momentarily, but first I'm going to tell you a little bit about our webinar series. They are all complimentary. They run from 12 p.m. to 12:30 p.m. Eastern Time. The full list is on our website under the webinar section, and we've been doing this for a couple years, so we do have probably 30 or 40 webinars that have been recorded on a variety of topics. A little bit about us. We're based in downtown Washington, D.C., providing various services for government contractors, including GSA schedules and proposal writing. We also host a lot of government contractor events, and stay tuned for upcoming events that we're hosting. A little bit there about me, but more importantly, I'd rather dig into our speaker today, David Dempsey, who was gracious enough to share his time and knowledge. So David, I will turn it over to you, and thanks again for joining us today.
Sure. Thank you, Jennifer. I appreciate the opportunity to work with you and work with your database here. As you can see, I'm just another guy who went to college and went to law school, but I'm a recovering government contracts lawyer, so I've been doing this for 40 years. The firm itself, Dempsey Fontana, is a specialized government contracts firm. There's 4 of us here. We go through all the items that are identified in the second bullet, and then if I may be so unkind as to say, the large firm expertise and the small cost is pretty straightforward. Essentially, even though I've got 40 years of experience and would be billed at around 1,000 at a large firm, I'm billed at less than half that. And I'm working with a company now where their partner is, their law firm is billing them at roughly twice my rates. But enough about that. With respect to the eligibility, I wanted to quickly go into the FAR, because the FAR has a requirement for safeguarding contractor information systems. And as you can see, this is pretty straightforward. But with respect to the true utility of this clause, I would point you to the responsibilities imposed on a contractor. And this would be in the next slide under FAR 204-21. One of the more overlooked elements of a non-disclosure agreement or a teaming agreement is that clause that says we will treat your data like you'll treat ours, et cetera, and no one gives it much thought. But now this FAR clause provides 15 specific items that are quite worthy of a non-disclosure agreement, teaming agreement, and then later on with a subcontract. I mention this because you can either incorporate FAR 52.204-21 into the non-disclosure agreement, and that way, you know, they have to have certain fundamental requirements associated with limitations on access, identification, authentication, that sort of stuff, which you don't know if you have when you just simply say we're going to go ahead and treat your information like you treat yours, and vice versa. So that's why I mentioned it up. And then also, there's a phrase, a defined term, federal contract information. So be sure to know when you are marking information that you provide in a proposal or an exchange of emails, if there's any federal contract information at all. And I bring this up like I did a year ago when I was doing something like this with Jennifer on teaming agreements. The Defend Trade Secrets Act, which is just simply mentioned on the next slide, is something that companies, I think, have to pay more attention to. It's no longer an ability to protect information related to someone's promise to handle it properly. I think now that you have to take care of the information that your company generates much more seriously than you did in the past because of the accessibility of such information through various cyber schemes. Now on the defense clause, this is on the one that requires the NIST information scheme. If we go to the next slide, you'll see that I first bring up 7008, DFAR 252.204-7008, because that clause is the one that says by submission of this offer, you agree to have a system that implements NIST Special Publication 800-171, which I'll be referring to essentially as NIST 171 from here on. And you can get a copy of that just by going to the website, and that website is also in the DoD clause. So you want to make sure you're dealing with revision 1, because that is the obligation nowadays. And you'll note that if there's any problems with your NIST plan, then you can work something out with the DoD CIO's office. I'll get into that later. And then finally, with respect to enforcement, DoD indicated in June that the DCMA would be doing the enforcement of these cybersecurity plans, these NIST compliant cybersecurity plans. I haven't seen anything that DCMA has on the website just yet, but I can tell you that their handbook that I've given a cite to here is something that you ought to keep in mind when you're going through and putting your plan together. That makes sense in my estimation, because those are the guys who are going to, in effect, grade your plan. So now we get to the clause itself, the main clause that the government, the Defense Department has put out. This is the DFAR 252.204-7012 clause, and I'll be referring to it as the 7012 clause. A lot of history behind this clause, virtually all of which can be ignored now because of the updates that the clause has gone through. This is the third iteration that we're working on now with the October 21, 2016 clause. Another element I think you ought to keep in mind with respect to paying attention to this clause is that it's likely to replace the FAR clause I just spoke about. Again, DoD indicated in June that it was in discussions with the National Archives Office, and they were going to have negotiations, discussions, etc., related to what the best way is to implement NIST 171 in the non-defense world. I have no idea when this is supposed to be coming out, and in my efforts to find out, it turns out no one else knows when it's going to come out either. So when you're putting together a NIST plan, I think you should assume that the requirement you put together for DoD is ultimately going to be the requirement that you're going to have to do for federal agencies or non-defense agencies. And an example of that would be in the latest GSA schedule for Group 70, where if you're going to be selling these so-called highly adaptive cybersecurity services, then according to the information in that particular revision of Schedule 70, it particularly incorporates NIST 171 and about a dozen other NIST plans. So that's what we'll be seeing now for GSA, and also what I think you can expect that from DHS and other companies, other agencies. So anyway, we have here the 4 basic clauses, and I'm going to be ignoring 7009 because it can be explained, I think, easier when you go to read the PGI, DFARS PGI on safeguarding cover defense information in cyber incident reporting. You'll see it's the second in the first bullet and second item. That's, to me, is the easiest way to introduce yourself to this requirement, and then go read the clause. So when you start reading the clause, you're going to see a bunch of definitions, and I've got some of them identified on the next slide here. And what this slide does is identify probably the focus of the clause itself. First of all, you've got something called contractor attributional / proprietary information. That's a trade secret in so many words. So remember, when you're working with somebody, mark your stuff contractor attributional / proprietary information, along with the confidential, et cetera, that you normally put on your documents. And I'm not talking about the far footer on this information is only for the government, not to be used, et cetera. This is for any exchanges that you have between a sub and a prime, or 2 primes, or third, fourth level subcontractors, consultants, et cetera. And I would put it on your proposals, because it's a defined term in the DoD regs. And to the extent that you're working on a non-DoD proposal, I would go ahead and put that in there with a normal footer and define it in the first page, footnote the executive summary or something like that. Now, another defined term here is adequate security, and that essentially means NIST 171 is what you have to be compliant to, and there's the site for it. And under the current time frame, it's December 31, 2017, a couple of months from now, you have to have a NIST compliant plan in order to put a proposal in. There is no requirement right now that I've seen that says if you don't have this plan, you can't have a contract. But there is nothing to prevent a contracting officer, particularly on some procurements, where that contracting officer will say, if you don't have a plan, then I'm not going to deal with you, period. And there'll be a reason for that. And when somebody protested, et cetera, I don't see that protest being very successful, regardless of whether or not you're a small business. And I'll get in how to handle that in a few minutes. Now, the clause focuses, this is the 7012 clause, focuses on the cyber incident, the rapidly reporting, and the forensic analysis done by the Defense Department. So it's particularly useful, I think, to understand that the PGI explains this pretty well. But keep in mind, the last bullet down there, it refers to this medium assurance certificate, which the contractor has to have in order to report an incident. So there's a little step in between that the prime and the subcontractor have to have in order to report an incident. The reason I mentioned and subcontractor is because the clause requires subcontractors reporting directly to the what they referred to here as the Defense Industrial Base office, the DIB net, where the reports go. So right away, this clause is in a contract. These definitions are going to fit in. The only type of contract where it's not going to apply is going to be a COTS contract, commercial off-the-shelf items only. In a commercial contract, it will apply. There's no known dollar value on this except for the purchase card type of requirements, and that's about it. So it's going to apply to you, and as I mentioned, sooner or later it's going to apply to all contracts, as near as I can tell. Now, with respect to this one intermediate step, according to DoD, if the contract with CDI, which is the information that we're trying to do, which is the confidential defense information. The reason it's important is if you have this contract prior to October of this year, then you have to go through an exercise with the contracting officer to figure out whether your NIST plan is going to be acceptable. And I have not had any experience on this yet, nor have I met anyone who has had any experience on whether or not there's any type of serious negotiations or discussions between the contractor or the subcontractor, if it's a significant subcontractor, and the CIO's office for purposes of establishing the adequacy of their NIST plan. When talking with DoD officials, they say it hadn't come up yet, but I'll be telling you in a few minutes. Again, in June, there seems to be a workaround here that DoD is willing to live with. When I mentioned earlier the fact that NIST 171 had been revised, I think the focus on there is paragraph 3.12.4. That's the only addition to the NIST from the prior version. And you can see that talks about updating your system security plan. And that will be, I'll be getting to that shortly also, but that's the difference. And that seems to be what the DoD is focusing on, that system security plan. So now we're back to cyber incident reporting, and this is the basis for the entire clause. And as it says on the next slide here, with respect to cyber incident reporting, you have to discover a cyber incident for covered contractor information on your covered contract information system that affects performance or affects the system or affects anything associated with your contract. I mention that because that's the first thing you want to think about. If you do discover a cyber incident of sorts, defined term, then you figure out if it affects anything. Because if it doesn't affect anything, there's no reporting requirement. If it does, or you think it does, then there's the obligation to report. And in some of the efforts to influence this clause, this 7012 clause over the past couple of years, one of the issues that came up was whether or not a company would be in jeopardy if they reported an incident, and whether or not there would be any liability from reporting an incident. Because remember, this clause goes all the way down from the prime down to the lowest subcontractor. And the answer to that is that if you are a cleared defense contractor, which is not defined anywhere except by reference, it's not in the clause, but the point is that means you've got a system that works, a NIST system that works and been approved. And if you do, then you're not going to have any liability. And that's 10 USC 393. So you can have statutory reference to that absence of liability if you are a cleared contractor. The second bullet down there, the second small bullet is the time frame. Can you do a report in 72 hours? The answer is yes, because that's the current time frame, and that comes right out of the clause. And then when you do the incident report, I would suggest you ignore the clause and you go to this reference that I've got there, which is from the clause itself, and it is on the next slide. I'm sorry for not watching that down here at the bottom. That is 32 CFR Part 236, and that is not a reference to the FAR. That's a reference to the Defense Industrial Base cybersecurity activities, and it basically explains in 11 pages what's necessary to put in a mandatory cyber incident report. So please keep that in mind. The clause itself is not going to tell you all that you have to have in your cyber incident report. And then moving over to the next slide on what should be in the cyber report is whether there's any malicious software, whether the media that is involved can have the known effect on information systems, and and for at least 90 days, if you define that, you got to freeze that media, which is going to be your software or the information that you've got. You've got to make sure that that is not untouched, because if DoD decides that that is the biggest problem associated, that you have a serious incident, they want to come in and do their own forensic report, forensic analysis. So now we get to the marking again, because I am very, unfortunately, very experienced at seeing contractors in effect get into difficulty. I've told you about the markings there, and then I want to make sure that when a large company says, don't worry about the markings, just give us the markings in these tech data clauses. Remember that these two tech data clauses, the tech data and software clauses, they're licensing statements. They are not notice statements. So we've got the cyber incident report going. When we go to the next slide, this is where the limitations on the use of third party, and this is the one I'm not going to spend much time, or not going to spend any time on, because it doesn't affect anything that you can't get out of the regs and the PGI. So now we skip down one more slide to NIST. We're finally to the NIST thing. And there's 110 requirements, 14 areas, and I've broken out all the 14 areas that are supposed to be addressed, or must be addressed in your NIST 171 compliance plan. First thing you got to keep in mind is the government expects it to be changing all the time. It's a dynamic plan, and there is no prescribed format. And the couple, 6, I guess, that I've been involved with, and excuse me, you don't want a lawyer to write up your cybersecurity plan. You want security guys and cybersecurity guys who know what they're talking about to write up the plan. So I'm again emphasizing 3.12.4, which is in this 171. And then when we go to the DoD guidance identified on the next page here, what we first got is an explanation of the type of information DoD is trying to protect, and that's basically federal contract information, controlled unclassified information, unclassified controlled technical information, and covered defense information, or CDI. Now the CDI that you know about, this should be identified in the proposal, in the RFP, or by your prime contractor. So please find out if the contract you're working on has any covered defense information at all, because if it does, your plan kicks in, and you have to have a way to address it, and your employees have to have a way to address it. As past June, DoD focused on the system security plan and what they called a plan of action and milestones. So what this appears to mean, this is in the industry meeting, what this appears to mean is that if you don't have a complete NIST 171 plan, you at least have a plan to have a plan. and you have some basic system security plan for whatever you're going to be using when you're handling covered defense information, export controlled information, obviously classified information. So if you have classified information, you've already got a basic plan involved, and there you would just take that plan and see if it matches up to the NIST 171. If you do a lot of exporting under the ITAR versus the EAR, then you're going to have an export control plan, and again, you go back and take your export control plan and match it up with the 171 requirements. They're not going to be the same, but they will prevent, they will help you get past writer's block. So we go to the next slide. What I've got is an outline of stuff, or outline of things that I've put together from my own experience with this. First, it's like any plan with the government, I guess, or any security plan with IT systems. You have to have your revision history, and the DoD guys like to see that on the first page. The second page. First page says here's our plan. Second page says here's our revision history, and then an introduction on why the plan is the way it is, and what this to me constitutes is your explanation on why the plan that you're providing has any exceptions to the NIST plan. And you can use anything you want. The export control plan, your classified information plan, elements of your in-house threat plan, your internal threat plan with DSS. And then I've found that using the DCAA user agreement is a pretty good way to start. And then the table of contents introduction says this introduction says we're complying with 171. And then go into a description of your operating environment. Did you have 200 desktops or one desktop? And 50 laptops, and how many in your inventory, how many workstations, handhelds, smartphones, et cetera, the printers, of course, and laptops do you have? So in other words, you're telling the government that you have an idea of what you're doing, and then you put in your system security plan. And if you go to Appendix D of 171, you're going to see a grid where NIST has identified the 110 requirements they want. And in Appendix D, they compare it to NIST 800-53, which is the government's plan. And the relevance, I mentioned that because in the second iteration of the clause here, there was a reference to putting up a cybersecurity plan that met the requirements of 800-53. And what NIST did was just give you a roadmap on 171 and 53. But my suggestion is you have the requirement, the outline I've got below there, which is the security plan requirement from NIST. Did your company implement it or not? And it's going to be yes or no. And if it's no, then you explain why. And that could be we've got things sorted out with our DCMA plan. It's covered in our ECP for our exports. It's covered in our classified information requirements. And then if it's not going to be addressed, if you got something that doesn't come out of those other exceptions, then you say we're going to have this implemented in our system security plan and our plan of action and milestones by December 31, 2017, and you simply give the milestone that you plan to have in place and when. And again, according to DoD, they're likely to pass on that plan and say it's acceptable, which then makes you a cleared contractor, which then makes you eligible for the contracts that you otherwise may not be eligible for if a contracting officer were to say, if you're not a cleared contractor, we're not going to deal with you. Or if you're not a cleared contractor, your evaluation is going to be affected considerably. So if you have any questions, please give me a call or send me in an email. I would prefer the email since that's the easiest way for me to get back to you. And that's it. So thank you for listening, and thank you, Jennifer.
Thank you, David, and thanks to all the attendees who were able to join us today. We've hit the 12:30 mark, and we're trying to keep these short and sweet. So instead of taking live questions, you've got David's contact information there. And as he mentioned, he prefers the email. So if you had to join late and you want to hear the presentation in its entirety, we are going to be posting the recordings probably towards the end of the week, so a couple days after each webinar. And the full list, again, is on our website, along with some other ones that we've done in the past. So again, thanks everybody for joining us. Thanks, David, for sharing your time and expertise. And we'll be back on tomorrow at 12 o'clock and the rest of the week as well. Thanks, everybody.
Take care, everyone. See you later. Bye.